welcome into another video dissecting the WATA Pop Reports. Today we are going to look at PlayStation 1. And I promise you, you're gonna love this. It's pretty interesting to look at. So let's just go ahead and start with the big level stuff. They have graded 890 unique PlayStation 1 games, which I think the total North American library is something like 1,400 games, maybe 1,500 games. So 900 is pretty darn good, actually. That's well over half the library that has been submitted, and as you guys know, there is a ton of filler, not worth submitting PlayStation 1 games. I'm not sure if we'll ever see every PS1 game get submitted. I guess we probably will at some point, but it'll be years down the road. The total number of games graded is 5,294, compared to Super Nintendo there at 4,600, and NES, remember, was the highest at over 10,000. PlayStation 1 is actually a pretty popular console to submit for. Now let's talk about this nice little color chart I have here, which breaks down the total distribution of the games that have been graded thus far, and the data here shows that you should really hit the like button to help spread this video and subscribe if you like the content. Also, thank you to every single Patreon member as well as YouTube members that support the channel. I can't do it without you guys. Right, the color chart, that's what I was talking about. If we look at the 9.6 and the 9.8 level specifically, 29% of all submitted games are 9.6s, 27% are 9.8s. And when we're looking at something like PlayStation 1 now, where literally 73% of all of the submitted items so far are either 9.4, 9.6, or 9.8, you can see how important the seal grade is going to become. We might also see that A++ is very common on PlayStation 1, but it also could be that a lot of these high grade items do only have A+ seals, in which case we will still have a chase at the 9.8 A++. But as it stands, wow, that is even higher distribution than I thought it was going to be for these hard case games. This data right here is a look into how I assume the PS2, GameCube, original Xbox, and especially the more modern console pop reports are going to look. And that makes sense, right? This is how it works. If you look at modern sports cards, modern Pokemon cards, the pop reports are all 9s and all 10s. Basically, if you don't get the 10 on a modern trading card, you wasted your time. It wouldn't be weird to see modern video games have the exact same direction. What is also super funny though, if we look over at the 9.0 grade, what do we see? A nice little dip where we have 7% 8.5s, 6% 9.2s, and 2% of the 9. Again, following the pattern that we saw with NES, Super Nintendo, and Nintendo 64. 9 sees a dip. Are we going to see this trend continue on every single console? Put your bets down below. With such a high distribution in the high grades for PS1, the weighted average right now is almost a 9.4. 9.38 is your average PS1 graded game right now. That is insane. So let's talk about this a bit. Why is it skewed so heavily towards the high end of the scale? We are still early into video game grading. So when you're submitting PlayStation 1 games, you have the nice little jewel cases there. The biggest piece of damage you can have to that jewel case is a crack in it. And basically, at this point in time, if you have a cracked PS1 game, it's probably not worth submitting for grading. Now, of course, there's super valuable titles that buck that trend. There are always going to be exceptions, but that is kind of a general thought right now, right? A general rule. With me, I actually have here a copy of Clock Tower 2 on PlayStation 1. It is a 75 because it has at least one crack in it that I can easily notice right here on the right-hand side. With PS1 grading though, other than cracks, scuffs, chips, whatever, you also do have issues with the manual itself. WATA will grade the centering of the manual as well as if the manual has creases around the staples on the end. It is fully possible for the game to be damaged from the factory during packaging, and that is taken into account in the WATA grading process. But this is a perfect example of a PlayStation game that's very expensive even as a CIB, so of course if you have a factory sealed one, it's probably just worth getting graded even if the grade isn't going to be that high. Generally speaking, if your game does not have a crack in it, you're gonna fall into the 9.4 to 9.8 range. Unlike cardboard that can have very minor creases, dings, whatever, on the jewel case there just isn't nearly as much variance in the type of wear and damage you can have. I do expect this to go down in the future. Right now it truly is the best games being cherry picked and being sent off for grading, but these jewel case type systems, these DVD style case systems are always going to be skewed towards the higher end. So with this in mind, hopefully you're not surprised when we see more pop reports. Hopefully you can make more detailed decisions as as to when you should purchase something versus when maybe you should wait for a nicer copy. Is the item super rare to begin with? Is there likely to be more copies to come up? You can start weighing your decisions because, as you can see, a lot of these are going to be graded on the higher end. Perhaps the most interesting point of this population report is that there are 0 10s. I'll be honest here, when you have about 60% of the games in 9.6 or 9.8, how in the hell is there not a single 10? That just seems wild to me. That doesn't really make sense to me. That seems like an artificial boundary set around the 10, which I mean, I think there's only 10 10s that exist total right now. So yes, of course they are gatekeeping the 10 grade, but like, come on, right? Come on, surely one of them was a 10. Which also leads me to another point of pure speculation on my part, but maybe they held back the 10 so hard because now that modern grading is starting, they're going to introduce the 10. So you know how right now with PlayStation 1, 9.4, 9.6, 9.8, like there's not a whole lot of variance, there's not a whole lot of chase. Well, if you were to start introducing the 10 level for Nintendo Switch, PS4, PS5, all of a sudden, we might have that extra layer of chase. Pure speculation on my part, but I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing a lot more 10s coming out of WATA Games in the coming years. For those of you who like the nice charts, here is the WATA breakdown of PS1 games. Yeah, it's heavily skewed to the right hand side of the chart, with of course the little dip at the 9 there. Always funny to see. So let's talk about the actual population report a bit here before we go. I think a lot of people were surprised to see that Final Fantasy VII, I mean, yeah, Ultimate Battle 22, whatever, I've talked about this game for over a year. Final Fantasy VII is the highest graded game here, which if you've been collecting for a while, you should have a handle that FF7 isn't technically rare, but it's a super demand game. We've talked about this a lot of times here. What was surprising to me though on the FF7 Pop Report is that Realistic Violence, the first print, is actually the most common of the Black Label copies, and that the Masterpiece Corrected, which is technically the third print Black Label copy of the game, is by far the most rare? I couldn't have told you that. That's kind of interesting. And of course, across all three of the Black Label variants, we have 30 copies that are in 9.8 condition, which again, 30 copies in 9.8, that's kind of a lot, relatively speaking, but how many of those copies are an A+, or an A++? And that's where it's going to get a lot more interesting. Coming down, we have Final Fantasy IX and Final Fantasy VIII, one of the greatest games ever made, which is all Black Label. There's barely any greatest hits on this Pop Report. Metal Gear Solid also rounds out the top 5 most submitted PS1 games, and again, it's almost all Black Label copies at 63, and it's almost all case fresh Black Label copies. 15 9.6s and 36 9.8s. Metal Gear Solid, kind of surprisingly, is a pretty available game. There were cases of it floating around for a long time. There are still probably cases out there, to be honest with you. It's kind of like Perfect Dark on N64 in that regard, but not quite to that degree. Then we have Grand Theft Auto here with 59. 30 of them are Black Label copies. Only 5 of them, though, are the teen rating version. The actual first print of Grand Theft Auto. Only 5 of them. That's pretty cool. Final Fantasy Origins, very common as well. I'm actually surprised there aren't more copies of this submitted. With PlayStation 1, it really does matter which games are popular enough, valuable enough, and rare enough to submit. It's not as easy to simply send any kind of game to WATA and hope to make money, so it's going to be really concentrated to the most popular PS1 games here that have been submitted the most frequently. Castlevania Symphony of the Night, one of the best games on the PlayStation 1. 22 Black Label copies there, but no 9.8s. That's pretty interesting to see there. Crash Bandicoot here. There's 33 copies, right? Which is just, there's 15 Black Label Crash Bandicoots, which is just insane to me. This is one of the biggest surprises for myself. When I first saw Crash Bandicoot sell for 5 figures, I was like, oh, no way. Crash Bandicoot PS1, it has to be out there, it has to be common. Here we are now, 2 years later since this game exploded in price, and we still have none that were submitted to WATA. Crazy to see how low the population on this very popular PS1 game is. And that's actually how I felt with a lot of the PlayStation 1 games when I was going through. Like even Tomb Raider here, right? Black Label Tomb Raider has 17 copies. Again, no 9.8. It's just surprising that I thought there would have been more surviving copies, higher numbers on a lot of these games, or at least higher numbers to begin with on this population report. Tomb Raider has sales at $20, $30, $50,000, right? If you own a Black Label Tomb Raider, the incentive to send it in for grading right now is basically as high as it'll ever be. Crazy to see see, it's still sitting so low. Another one, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Black Label first prints here. There's 22 of them. Another really popular game, or at least, you know, I thought it would have a higher population count than it does. At this point now, we're already down to only 20 total copies on the population report. So like at this point in time, everything looks rare. There isn't a whole lot of relative analysis I can do. There just aren't enough numbers on the population report. If I give another couple scrolls of the mouse here, now we're down to 9 copies with Alundra 2. There just aren't really enough numbers on this population report to give a lot of analysis one way or the other. As it stands right now, almost every PlayStation 1 game is rare to find in a WATA case. Much like you guys, once they finally start updating these population reports real time, I'll be looking at the updates, I'll be keeping tabs on it, and I'll be following along. Hopefully you enjoyed a video on PS1 here. Let me know in the comments if there's any game that surprised you, and I'll see you guys in the next video.